It's a series of simple steps, but as you get better, do you know at the beginning I was saying practice your craft, learn, get better. If you can do each simple step really well, the out the outcome is going to be really good.
What is up, Shaping Nation? This is Nick Torres here. And today I had the great pleasure of interviewing Drew Caines. Drew makes some really incredible sculptures. Some are robotic toy themed, some are just nature inspired themed. But in this episode, you will learn how Drew creates his unique sculptures. You also learn about how Drew adds multiple influences and enthusiasms in his life into his own sculptures. And finally, you'll learn about why you need to be making great work every single time you're making pottery. And there's so much more in this episode. I hope you guys enjoy it. I'll see you guys in there. Drew, welcome to Shaping Your Pottery, and share with me, what is something you believe potters should be doing to have success in pottery?
Well, what a big question to start with, eh? I think the answer is quite straightforward, though, right? First of all, you want to do your best work. You want to be improving all the time. Yeah, that would be the main thing, I would say. Just keep improving your craft.
Definitely agree.
Learn from people. Do your best work. Don't cut corners. Don't copy people. And develop your own voice.
Absolutely love that advice. Some great advice right there. So now, tell me the story how you got started making pottery.
Right. Well, let's go back to the beginning. When I was a kid, I used to really love plasticine. Do you know, like modeling clay that you can get in Britain? It's called
Mm-hmm.
plasticine anyway. And when I was about 6, I went to my mum's friend's house, and her son had plasticine, but he had tools, he had knives, he had like a tray, he had a whole setup going on. So I did that, and I played with plasticine, and I loved it. And then like years later, I was actually doing a night class in art, and this guy said, "Oh, I do pottery. I teach a pottery night class. You might like it." So I started doing it, and suddenly everything that I used to do as a kid just all came flooding back. Because without realizing it, I'd sort of developed techniques that were immediately useful for doing pottery. So that's how I began.
So now, what made you continue the pottery journey?
Well, at the time, I was working as an illustrator, and then I was doing like digital graphics, web designing, that sort of stuff. But I just really enjoyed doing the pottery night class, and I just realised this is what I want to do. And then, but I was diverted by doing other stuff. But eventually, I came back to it in a more full time way, if that makes sense.
So, you mentioned that you were doing some other stuff before, and like you were doing freelance illustrator stuff before you really started diving deep into pottery. How did this experience help you with your own pottery and your own sculptures?
Well, I mean, it's all design, isn't it? It's all creativity. It's all design. So obviously, that side of it, thinking of ideas, developing ideas, that was all very useful. I used to have a very intricate illustration style. I used to use like they call it isograph pens. They're like little fine ink pens, like down to like a third of a millimeter nib and stuff. And it took me a few years after I was doing pottery to sort of take what I'd been doing in illustration and realize how I could do it in pottery. But once I did, I had all that experience to draw on. And I think also because I've done quite a lot of work doing things like logos and like simple graphics but high impact. I had a sort of mindset. So when I was making pottery, I sort of brought that to it as well. So I like a lot of strong silhouettes. I like a lot of detail. Yeah.
I love that. Shaping Nation, if you have experience in other art forms or other just experience in general, you can bring those experiences and put them into your own pottery. Absolutely love that. So let's talk about your sculptures.
Well, can I
Go
can I
ahead.
can I just go back on something like that? Because since I've been on Instagram, I've met quite a lot of other potters, ceramists, sculptors, or whatever, and I've noticed that you get quite a few people who come from a different background. So designers, um, just by chance, I met a lot of art doll makers who sort of they cross over into pottery because they're making like porcelain heads and stuff like that. And it's interesting that they have a different. Do you know if I don't know what your story is, but if in Britain, do you know like you go to night classes, you might do a degree, whatever. It's there's like what am I trying to say? There's like a process you go through, and it's the same process wherever you are, and it's a certain mindset. If you come from a different discipline, you bring a different mindset to it. So you're maybe going to make things that someone who'd been brought up in a traditional pottery background wouldn't think of making. Or do you see what I'm saying? So I
Yeah,
think it's really interesting actually, and I think some of the people who are doing the most interesting stuff with clay are people who maybe come from a different background rather than the traditional route.
absolutely agree 100% on that. So let's talk about your sculptures. Can you tell me the story how you started making sculptures that you make today?
Right. Yeah. So when I started, like I don't know, right, but for at that night class, first thing we did was a pinch pot. Then we did a slab pot. Then we did what else? I can't remember. But we were doing that sort of thing, and I realised that what I really like doing is hand building. So and I like the broken. Right. Yeah, you might have to edit this this bit.
No worries.
I just, like sometimes there's too many things to say, and it's thinking of what's important. Like, how did I come to make the sculptures that I made today? It's just incremental, isn't it? Because I started making a small thing, and then I developed on that, and I developed on that, and now sometimes I make really big things and super detailed or over ornamented things. So I think it's just a gradual process of building up to it.
So now you mentioned that you really enjoyed the hand building aspect of pottery. Can
Yeah.
you tell me more about that?
Well, I just love it. I'm sure you feel the same. Clay's lovely, isn't it? It's beautiful. The feel of clay, all the different stages. When it's dry, when it's wet, has different qualities, different types of clay. Just fascinated me that you could make things, and then of course when you fire them, they become permanent. I really like soft things that become hard without without being a double entendre. But the idea that your thumb goes into the clay and it makes a mark, and then it's fired, and then that potentially that could last for thousands of years. It's just amazing. So,
I absolutely agree. I love that aspect of pottery. It's so cool. So now you are inspired by historical and folklore as well as nature art. Can you tell me how this impacts the way you make your own sculptures?
well, yeah, like I'm a person. I have enthusiasms. Like when I was a kid, I was really into comics. Then later on, I was into like illustration and things like this. And the last few years, my main thing has been like really ancient art, like going back to Paleolithic, like cave art. I saw a picture, and it was two bison made out of clay, river clay, deep in a cave in France. It was unfired, but it was 15,000 years old. And when I saw that, it just like totally blew my mind because I feel ceramics is such an ancient art form that you're working in a tradition goes right back. But when you think of those people who are making those clay bison like 15,000 years ago, they were probably thinking similar things to what we would think, when we're making, because like they're thinking, oh, how shall I do this hair? Or, oh, I need to fix that. And So yeah, I love it. I love being in the long tradition of makers, going right back to the earliest times. And what's interesting is like people often think of cave people as being like primitive. Obviously, they had exactly the same brains as us, so they were exactly as intelligent as us. They just had a different cultural background and obviously like really different. But their emotions, their feelings, their creative urge is the same. And some of the artwork from there. There's a cave in France called Chauvet Cave, which they found in the 90s, and it's one of the oldest. But people think that art has become more and more sophisticated over time, but actually the art in Chauvet is just amazing. It's like they were geniuses. So I really like. I partly like the look of it, but what I really like is the spirit, the feel of it, the feel of being a maker, and that's mainly what I bring to my work. But also because, like I said before, because I'm a person who has lots of enthusiasms, and I'm knocking on now. I'm 57 now, so I've experienced a lot of things. I've seen a lot of things. I've learnt about a lot of things. So if you take, I often make robots, and I always think like when I look at my robots, there's a teaspoon of sort of Victorian, cyberpunk engineering. There's a teaspoon of sort of Japanese tin toys and nostalgia. There's a teaspoon of sort of oceanic tikis and African fetish idols and stuff like that. So, if I was giving advice to people, just say like, just bring as much as you can to your work.
Absolutely agree. Shape Nation, you can combine all of your interests into your pottery and you're going to make something really, really beautiful and great. I love that so much. So, now can you walk me through your process of how you create your robot sculptures?
Okay, so you may, I'll just digress a bit. You may notice I do digress a bit because I do think of about 10 things to say all at once. But I was making a lot of hand built stuff, but I was more making vases and vessels and stuff like that. And then I was watching late night. I was watching. Do you know American Choppers? Have you ever heard of that?
No, I don't think I have.
It's a pretty lowbrow program. It's like some guys in Orange County in America, and they make custom chopper motorbikes. But there was a guy in that called Rick who does a lot of metal fabrication, and he was making the tanks for the motorbikes and stuff like that. And he was like stretching the metal, and he was doing this and he was doing that. And I suddenly realised like I could do that with clay. I could do something similar to that. So I thought, yeah, and I like robots, so I started making a robot. The way I do it is it's hard to it's very hard to say to explain it. Like I just make basically I make the components and then gradually fix them together. And I think a lot of my work is very complicated, but if I was going to give some advice to people, I'd say everything that's complicated is a series of simple steps. Like no one gets up and makes something amazing in one go, do they? They, like say an easy one to explain is like I make quite a lot of wall-mounted animal heads. So I start with a pinch pot, basically, very simple. Then I seal it, put a piece of clay on the back, so I've got a bubble, and then I just start refining it and refining it. And then once it's in the basic shape, then I'm adding the eyes, then I'm adding the ears, and so on. So it's a series of simple steps. But as you get better, at the beginning I was saying, practice your craft, learn, get better. If you can do each simple step really well, the out the outcome is going to be really good. Hopefully.
I love that so much. Shaping Nation, if you have this big, complicated idea, break it down into simple, simple steps and then your idea is going to most likely come to life. I love that so much.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the business side of pottery. Can you tell me about the moment when you decided to go full time with your pottery?
Yeah, well, so I'd been working freelance for about 15 years doing illustration, web design, that sort of stuff. But to be honest, I was doing it in my spare, my spare bedroom in front of a computer and not seeing anyone. And I got a bit fed up with that. So I was lucky to get a job at a community pottery, where it's an art studio really, but it had a really good pottery. And I was like the technician, but I was doing a bit of informal tutoring and all this sort of stuff. And then my wife got pregnant and we had twins, and I became a stay-at-home dad for 6 years. And then when that finished, like I couldn't go back to that job. I couldn't really go back to the web designing and stuff because I'd lost all my clients that I'd built up. So I was like, well, I'm either going to get a job working at a local shop or something because I still had kids that I had, youngish kids that I had responsibility for, or I'm gonna just try and do my pottery. And I thought, right, now or never, I'll just go for it. And luckily, where I live, there's an organisation called East Street Arts that rent out studio spaces to artists, and they've got a specific ceramics unit. So I got a studio with them, and that's how I started. So it was basically like I can either do something sensible, or I can just take a leap of faith and just go for it. And that's what I wanted to do. So I did. I tried it.
I love the leap of faith. I love it so much. So, what would you say was your biggest obstacle when you went full time?
My biggest obstacle was not knowing what you were saying about cursing. I didn't know what I was doing. So so yeah, and because I've been a stay-at-home dad for this 6 years, I'd done nothing creative for 6 years really. So I had to start slow. I took like a run up to it. So I just first thing I did was get my studio. Second thing I did was like start making some stuff and developing ideas and things like that. And I did that for about 6 months, which I was lucky to have the time to do it. And then someone at the studios, the studio manager said, "You really should get in. You should get on Instagram." And I'm like, "No, like I've been sat in my bedroom on a computer for 15 years. I'm sick of that. That the whole reason I want to do pottery is because it's to do with your hands. It's not ephemeral like digital stuff." But anyway, she convinced me to do it. Then I spent about a month photographing the work that I'd made, and then I made a big mistake. I just put it all up on Instagram in one day, and obviously, like no one, I had no followers, and so all like 6 months of work just went there.
I love it so much. So, you primarily sell your sculptures through galleries. Why did you choose galleries to show off your sculptures?
Well, actually, I'd say I'm more sell direct through Instagram now. Just because in Britain it's very traditional way. I mean, you can if you're selling ceramics or pottery, and you can do like markets and things like that, or you can sell direct through Instagram, or there's quite a large network of craft galleries, and I'm quite lucky where I am. There's quite a lot in this area, so I just started approaching them, and luckily they started saying yes, and I started exhibiting with them, and then I got a good break early on in Leeds where I live. There's the Craft and Design Gallery, which is a really high end gallery, and the woman who run it at the time, whose name his name escapes me actually, but she was very supportive and she gave me a lot of good advice. So yeah, that really launched me actually. She gave me like a showcase, and I got some publicity from that, and then based on that, I could then approach other galleries and say, "Oh, I had a showcase at this quite prestigious place." and gradually I got more. And also because of that, a lot of people had seen my stuff in real life. They then started following me on Instagram, and then gradually over time, I built up following on Instagram. And the great thing about that is you can sell all around the world, and no matter what you do, if you like what I do, I think it's. I mean, weird is probably the wrong word, but it's a bit unusual. But there's a billion people on Instagram, and if only like 0.00001% of people on Instagram like what I'm doing, that's still like 100,000, and I probably only need about 1,000 people in the rest of my life to buy stuff from me. So like the mathematics just work that way. But I still the upside with selling through galleries is a good gallery. This is another thing, right? I'd give advice to people like some galleries are rubbish, some galleries are really good. They all charge you commission. I don't mind paying the commission to the galleries that are good because they'll have a good clientele. They'll publicise your stuff and it works out. Whereas a bad gallery, I went to this one place when I first started, and the woman was like, "Oh yeah, I'll take loads of stuff." So I dropped the stuff off, and then I went back about a month later, and it was all just like, some of it was under tables. It was just terrible. I never sold anything there. So I'd say to people like, if you can get into a good gallery, it's worth it. And also, a lot of the time, people might find you in the gallery, and then they'll contact you on Instagram later. Like even today, like literally today, I had a guy who'd bought stuff when I had that showcase in Leeds. Like I think that was in 2019, and he contacted me last night and said, "Can I come down to your studio tomorrow?" And he came and he bought quite a lot of stuff today. So it's worth it for the exposure, and also if you can build up a network of galleries, or I'm saying galleries, but depending on what you're making, if you're making like small production pottery type functional wear or something, maybe it's not a gallery, but it's some sort of outlet. And if you can have like 10 outlets and each outlet sells a couple of pieces a month, that's like a good basis. And then if you're selling stuff direct on Instagram or whatever, then you're laughing really.
I love that. So, what advice would you give to someone that wants to get their own pottery, their own sculptures into galleries?
Well, I would say, right, I did an online during COVID. I did an online residency with East Street Arts, the people who I have my studio with, and I've got a profile on Instagram called Gorillagram 101, and it was all to do with using Instagram to sell pottery, right? So it's art for artists, basically. So I'd advise people if they've got time, go and have a look at that. But to get one of the things I mentioned in that is in the old days, right? If you wanted to get into a gallery, you would have to rock up with your work. You'd have to physically go to the shop or the venue and show it to them, and they might just say no, no thanks, and it's really, that's crushing. And really, you might only be able to physically go to 3 or 4 places, and if they all say no, then you've had it. Because the other thing, a side issue is like research your galleries. So it's no good going to a sculpture gallery if you're making teapots, and it's no point going to a craft gallery that specialises in teapots if you make sculptures. So research your galleries, develop an online presence, because then you can, if you contact them, it gives you the air of professionalism. I think it no matter what you're doing, if it's the first thing you've ever done or you've been doing it for years, you can present yourself as though you know what you're doing, and then people will just look at your work. And don't be dispirited if people turn you down, because I know from my experience that say I contact 10 galleries, maybe 6 of them might accept me, 4 might say no. It's just they're the wrong place for me. So what I'd say is, like, get your best work, get it photographed as best as you can, get it presented on Instagram or a website or whatever you want to do. Get an artist's state, maybe a bio, and sort of present it all in that way. But another good thing about being on Instagram is that once you've sort of established yourself, actually the galleries that I deal with now that are best for me are ones that found me and approached me, because it's another dynamic. Do you know, like, if say you, Nick, have set up a gallery and I come to you, maybe you're feeling a bit grumpy that day, or you know what I mean? You're like, nah, I'm just not feeling this. Get lost, sort of thing. But if you find me on Instagram and you think, oh, this is good work, and you approach me, then the dynamics completely switched, isn't it? And then
Hmm.
and that's like that's nice actually.
That was some excellent advice right there. I love that so much. So let's talk about discovering your voice. What is the best experience that you have had that has helped you with your growth as an artist?
Mm, that's a tricky one. I think it's like I said. I've been an enthusiast all my life for art. I love art of all kinds. So when I was a kid, I grew up in quite a small seaside town in Britain. Had a local library, had a small art section. So like one week I would get a book about Art Nouveau jewelry. The next week I'd be getting a book about Picasso. The next week I'll be doing this. I like going to places. I like going to like art galleries. I like doing things. It's hard to say. I've got obviously sketchbooks. I'd recommend people keep sketchbooks. I mean, I have sketchbooks, and you would if you looked through them, you wouldn't see a picture of anything that I've made, but it's maybe got things that just occurred to me, or little doodles, or just like a creative process that's going on in your mind. Yeah, that's a real tough one, really.
So now, what advice would you give to someone that is looking to discover their own unique voice with their pottery?
Oh yeah, so well, like I was saying, like we all have influences. We all see things that we like, but I'd say, yeah, don't copy. You're never going to find your own voice if you copy. I think the great thing about clay is you can, because it's 3D and it's a physical object. When I was starting, I used to like start making something, and it'd be like, oh, I'm going to make a teapot, and now I'd start making, I like, I'm building a teapot or something. But just the way I'd push my thumb into it would suggest something else, and it would just end up being something else, and I would just follow that. So I'd be like, be free, explore, suck influence in like a sponge. But like I say, don't copy. Like, suck, expose yourself to as much good art of all types, not just ceramics or pottery, but don't copy it. Like, bring it in, let your brain mash it up, and then get it out, and then hopefully you'll find your own voice.
Excellent advice right there. So, as we're coming to a close here today, what is one thing you want to hammer home with my audience today?
One thing. Oh, that's tough. Everything I've already said in the rest of in the in the thing. I just that what I just said before. Really, it's like, oh, have your mind open to stuff, to influences. Look at great art. Look at great pottery. Learn, relearn. Constantly strive. Yeah, all right. The one thing I would say is do your best. Always do your best. Like, I've done things, I've made things in the past, and I've sort of thought, well, I can't really be bothered finishing this, or you know, I've got a kiln to fire tomorrow, or I need it finishing, right? And I've sort of compromised on it, and it's never worked out. It's never been a good decision. It's like do everything as best as you can, and just have a high standards. I'd say that's the one thing. Like, have high standards and stick to them.
Definitely agree. And that was some excellent parting words of advice. Drew, it was so great chatting with you today. Where can my artists go and learn more about you?
Yeah, well, I'm on Instagram, obviously, at Drew Caines Ceramics, which is it's like a daily one. So I'll be posting things that I'm making, things that are interesting to me. But I've also got another profile which is at Drew Caines Gallery, which is more just finished pieces. And I'd actually say that it's good advice to. Like, I picked it up from somebody else, but it's like if you have two profiles, have one that's your sort of day to day making, or your process, because people like to engage. If people are going to buy your work, they quite like to buy into the whole process of how it's made and that sort of stuff. But on the other hand, that can get a bit tedious to people who don't want to see all that. And if they, so it's good to have another profile where you just have this is finished, this is finished, this is finished. So you can refer. So if I'm approaching a gallery, I will always point them to my Drew Caines gallery profile because it's just the finished pieces. Or if someone approaches me about doing a commission or something, I'd send them to that. So yeah, Drew Caines at Drew Caines Ceramics and at Drew Caines